Today, another great book, Ego is the Enemy.
And I feel like a book like this, Ego is the Enemy by Ryan Holiday, is like
their main enemy is inside them. It's in you right now, and it is your ego.
Wait a second. Why is everybody taking this statement for granted? Is ego really the enemy? What is ego to begin with, and why is it being vilified by everybody? Either one of two things are true. Either Ryan's right, and ego is in fact the enemy, or his initial premise, that is his definition of the ego itself, is wrong, and therefore ego is not the enemy. Well, let's take a look at it. Ryan begins his book by disregarding major philosophical and psychological definitions of the ego as being true enough but of little value outside the clinical setting. Freud's definition, which Ryan mentions in the book, that the ego is more like a horse rider guiding and controlling the animal, which represents our unconscious drives, is true enough but of little value. Or say Nietzsche's definition of the ego as a fundamental aspect of a strong individual capable of asserting his will to power to achieve and conquer. Or Ayn Rand's definition for the ego being the fountainhead of human progress. So on and so forth. Ryan disregards all of this by saying it has little value outside of a clinical setting. So Ryan then goes on and defines ego as, and I quote, an unhealthy belief in our own importance, arrogance, self-centered ambition. That's the definition this book will use. It's that petulant child inside every person, the one that chooses getting his or her way over anything or anyone else. The need to be better than, more than, recognized for, far past any reasonable utility. That's ego. Now let's dissect Ryan's definition and see if it's gonna hold up scrutiny. The first claim that Ryan makes is that ego is an unhealthy belief in our own importance. Now this begs the question, what constitutes an unhealthy belief in our own importance? Is 50% belief in our own importance healthy? Or 20%? How about 80%? What's the standard here? What makes the belief in our own importance healthy or unhealthy? Since Ryan failed to be precise with his language here, I will do the explaining. Your belief in your own importance is not only what makes you alive and what gives you the incentive to survive, but it is the drive behind all great achievements. Think about the great men of history, from military leaders to artists and scientists. Whether they admit it verbally or not, they all believed in their own importance, and by extension, the importance of their ideas. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to exert their will and make their ideas come to life. If you do not believe in your own importance, then you will unalive yourself, plain and simple. And if you do not do that, that means you are talking nonsense and you don't actually believe what you say. So here is a better explanation of what an unhealthy belief in our own importance is. Those who have little belief in their own importance live miserable lives, and that is what I would call unhealthy. Those who have just enough of it live normal lives. Those who have plenty of it tend to be high achievers. Those who completely lack it, they unalive themselves. So Ryan's first sentence and his definition of ego failed scrutiny. But we are not done yet. Let's go to the next claim, which is that ego is arrogance and self-centered ambition. Well, now it seems that Ryan just decided to define ego as whatever sounds bad. Oh, arrogance is so bad. But what is arrogance anyway? People who tend to complain about arrogance tend to be losers themselves. Now, I'm not saying that Ryan is a loser. What I'm saying is, if someone feels good about himself, talks positively about himself, and is pretty good at what he does, and he doesn't shy away from saying it, People tend to call such behavior as arrogance. In this case, anyone who has pride in himself and his achievements is arrogant. Well, I do not think that there is anything bad with that. In fact, I would rather have so-called arrogance and pride than false modesty and mediocrity. And I think I've said that in one of my old videos. Moving on. Self-centered ambition. Well, sorry to burst your bubble, but we all start with self-centered ambitions. In fact, when you are young, all your ambitions should be self-centered. When you are young as a man, your value is non-existent. You have no money, no power, no network, no nothing. So it is obvious that you should be self-centered at this point. It is through acquiring resources and becoming successful on multiple levels that you would naturally develop a less self-centered ambition, if we can call it that. When you are helpless, you can't help anyone. By being self-centered and helping yourself first, you not only help others indirectly, because work in business is not a zero-sum game, but you put yourself in a better position to help more and more people and take the focus off yourself because you are not in survival mode anymore. Then Ryan goes on and says that ego is that petulant child inside every person, the one that chooses getting his or her way over anything or anyone else. Well, equating a child's unregulated behavior that stems from a lack of emotional control to ego is another attempt to define ego as whatever sounds bad. The need to be better than, more than, recognized for, far past any reasonable utility, that's ego. Again, Ryan, what is reasonable utility? Is that what we should limit ourselves to now? Listen up, boys, do not strive for greatness. Strive for reasonable utility. Do not make a beautiful chair, just make a chair. If you make it beautiful, that's beyond reasonable utility. Come on, get real. If the limit is reasonable utility, none of the great works of art, none of the progress we've made so far as a species, none of all the miracles we've managed to achieve for centuries would exist because they are anything but reasonable utility. To dare to be better than, more than, recognized for, far past any reasonable utility is what every man should strive for. And yes, it is ego, and it is a great thing to have. Do not ignore it. Do not suppress it. Cultivate it. Do your best to justify it, because your ego is not your enemy. Your ego is not your unregulated emotions. Your ego, the you, the self within that wants the best for you. Your ego is the fuel that propels you forward on the path to greatness. And even if you don't achieve it, you know that at least you fucking tried. So no, ego is not your enemy. Ego is your greatest asset. So embrace it.